Welcome home, horror fans. My name's Adam.
And I'm Zoe.
And today we're asking the question, is Carlos William Schenk?
Wow, what a question. I don't even know how to begin with the answer to that question.
Well, it's a very interesting question. Carlos obviously being introduced for the first time in sawx and is a character that sort of builds a bond with John Kramer. And he sort of, at the end of the film, walks out with Amanda and John as if they're now part of a family.
Yep.
So it does pose a question. Does John sort of say goodbye and that's it? Or does Carlos, with a giant bag of money and blood all over his face, now have a bigger story to tell?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely can see why people would maybe consider this being an option. I think that based on William Emmerson and how old he is in Spiral, the timeline does add up in terms of his age. It makes sense as to why William Emmerson would be a copycat, I suppose, or take, what Jigsaw does literally and decide that he wants to recreate Jigsaw's methods.
Yes, so it does add up very well. So
it does add up.
Timeline-wise,
Yep.
sawx obviously being placed around a couple months before John Kramer's death, and Jigsaw and Spiral are based, Jigsaw specifically is mentioned, 10 years after John Kramer's death.
John Kramer's dead and has been for 10 years.
And then Spiral is shortly
Assuming
after.
A couple of years or not
So
long
in a
after,
timeline perspective, Carlos would be almost the exact correct age that Will, which when we talk about Will, of course, the main villain of Spiral,
Yep.
or the Jigsaw killer of Spiral, he would line up pretty well.
He would. But let's talk about it from a technical standpoint.
Yes.
There is a lot they would have to change up to have this work.
Some explanations would have to be made.
A lot of explanations. It'd be very convoluted.
Yeah.
As we know, William Emerson's father is shot and killed in Spiral by a corrupt cop.
Correct. His backstory is that, of course, the reason why he's a Jigsaw killer is explained to be because growing up as a
Corrupt
kid
cop killed his
in
father.
New York City, that a cop killed his father, and now he has a thing against the cops.
And he wants to take the cops down.
Yeah.
We know that his father is not Mexican.
He's not Mexican.
He's not of Mexican descent.
That's right. Alternatively, on Carlos's side, we see Carlos's father in Mexico. He is very much a Mexican man.
The only way I suppose that they could go about saying this is that Carlos was adopted and that he was taken in by an American family or someone who lived in New York throughout the franchise at some point. So I feel like that is kind of justifiable. But we know that based on Saw Wiki, William Emerson's character specifically grew up in New York.
That's right.
So at what point would Carlos have been adopted? Growing up in New York really does sound like that it would have to be from an early age. I don't know.
It seems like a stretch.
Yeah.
The only way this possibly could work is if somehow, and maybe, with a giant bag of cash and, sort of the idea of having a better life, possibly he somehow did immigrate to the United States and started a life in New York City. Takes on a different persona maybe as William. It would be an interesting and big push for this to happen. It's not likely that at his age, for some reason, he would trade his Mexican parents for New York parents, unless something all of a sudden they explain bad happened to his parents.
Cecilia goes back and kills his parents.
Oh, that would be an interesting plot line too.
Unless.
Couldn't that be a thing? Yeah. Oh, could you imagine, she's sitting there with her head stuck out, and of course, who lives right there? Carlos's parents.
Yep.
And they hear her screaming, they hear some noise, and then they go and let her out, and all of a sudden she finishes the job and takes the money back off him.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now we're sort of really
now we're opening up a massive can of worms.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it from a realistic standpoint. I don't believe that William Emerson is Carlos, mainly because I don't think that we are ever going to get a look into Spiral or Spiral 2 or anything that Spiral was involved with. I don't even think William Emerson will ever make a return in the franchise.
The Spiral
again.
fans are crying right now. They don't want to hear this.
I don't think that after how successful sawx has done and how it really went back to the roots of the franchise, I don't think they're even going to bother touching on Spiral and what happened in Spiral in any future films. So I can't imagine that Carlos is William Emmerson. If it is, I don't think we'll find out for a very, very long time. I don't believe this theory.
I don't think that they will, sort of want to make any sort of Spiral sequels per se. I could see them bringing Will back as a character. He's not a bad character. Like the film, let's say we didn't love it, but Will, we didn't mind him so much. He seemed
not
like
terrible, but he's just not great.
He was kind of like a cool, calculated guy. He was pretty smart and stuff. Like I could see him coming back as an apprentice. But yeah, trying to make this jump and using Carlos and saying that he's grown up and become Will, it does seem very far-fetched.
Yeah.
We see two different sort of, a younger version of Will in New York City and Carlos growing up in Mexico. They're two very different storylines, and it would be very hard to say that they were the same person. So I think from a factual standpoint, Carlos is certainly somebody who they haven't planned to become some other random character that was in the Saw franchise. And if he does make a return, it'll be a brand new character. It does seem to make sense that they're very separate people, very different places that they grew up in. And going forward, will we see Carlos at all going forward? Probably not.
Probably not.
To be honest.
I wouldn't have thought so. I think Carlos served his greater purpose for the movie was to show how John interacts with a younger character and to show how he as a father would have been quite good and to pull on those emotional heartstrings and purely just to have that shock factor of having a child in the trap at the end of the film. I don't think that he's going to serve some greater purpose throughout the Saw franchise. I think there's always the possibility that they could bring him back as an apprentice, just like with Daniel Matthews, just like with Diana Gordon. Yep. I don't see it happening. I think it's a bit of a stretch for any of those things to happen.
I guess the one thing about bringing Carlos back as an apprentice or becoming Will is that it sort of goes against the whole idea that he was this innocent character. Yeah. Which is kind of really why he exists in Saw 10. He's almost the most innocent person they could come up with to be put in that trap with John, to really test John. And I think that turning him into apprentice kind of taints his character a little bit because it's like, he's supposed to be this innocent, pure guy. Nah, he's actually a killer too, turns out in the end. So smart enough to probably just leave this alone. Going forward, we've got bigger fish to fry. Carlos can just be a happy kid living his life out in Mexico with a bag of money.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say is like, of course, like a lot of people sort of pointed out, what's his parents going to say when he walks home with this face full of blood and a bag of cash anyway? That's really the bigger question.
More importantly, how is John and Amanda going to drop him off on the doorstep and explain that? Do they just leave him on the doorstep and like, okay, now we really got to go because it's like really awkward when your parents see us dropping you off.
It's like, all right, here's Carlos.
Do they clean him up first? Like, I don't know.
Don't go near that factory. There's a woman screaming with her head stuck in a thing. And so don't let him play soccer near that place anymore. Just enjoy the cash. Don't worry about the blood. See you later. We're off.
Yeah.
I would have loved to see that conversation.
I would have loved to have seen it. Maybe we'll get it in a deleted scene.
So there you have it, guys. If you were wondering sort of where Carlos goes and maybe there's a connection there, I think when you really look at the facts, I would say he's done and dusted.
Very unlikely,
He's moving forward.
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
no more Carlos. So otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next one.
See you next time, guys.
Game over.